Working the night shift can be terrifying. The silence, the empty hallways, the strange noises that seem to come from nowhere. Most people think the scariest part of working late is the exhaustion, but some know better. Some have seen things they can't explain. Some have heard whispers when no one else was there. Some have experienced moments of pure, paralyzing fear. Tonight, we bring you real horror stories from people who lived through the unimaginable while working in the dark. These aren't just ghost stories. These are real accounts from security guards, store clerks, hospital workers, and others who took a job expecting just another quiet shift, only to find themselves in the middle of something truly nightmarish. Maybe you've worked a late shift before. Maybe you've walked through an empty building at 3 a.m., feeling like someone was watching you. Maybe you've seen a shadow move where no shadow should be. If you've ever had that sinking feeling that you weren't alone, that something was lurking just out of sight, then you'll understand the fear in these stories. Because sometimes the darkness isn't empty. Sometimes something is waiting there. Throughout this video, you'll hear chilling encounters with the unknown, unexplained figures appearing on security cameras, footsteps echoing down abandoned hallways, voices calling out when no one is there. Some of these stories end with a logical explanation, but others remain a mystery. What would you do if you found yourself face to face with something that shouldn't exist? Would you run? Would you freeze? Or would you try to convince yourself that it was just your imagination? These tales are not for the faint of heart. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for an hour of real-life horror from those who have walked alone in the night. If you love terrifying stories, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more eerie content. And if you've ever had a paranormal or unexplained experience while working a night shift, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Now let's begin. The gas station was quiet at night. Too quiet. The only sounds were the distant hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car passing on the highway. James had worked the night shift for months, and he had grown used to the silence, the stillness, the feeling of being the only person awake in a sleeping town. But there were nights when the silence felt unnatural, when it pressed against him like a heavy weight, as if something unseen was watching. It started around 2:30 a.m. James was behind the counter, scrolling through his phone, when the glass door chimed. He looked up, expecting to see a trucker or a late-night traveler, but instead, a man stepped inside. He was tall, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes, dressed in a faded suit that looked decades old. He moved slowly, almost mechanically, as if each step required great effort. James greeted him, but the man said nothing. He just walked past the shelves, his gaze fixed straight ahead. James watched him for a moment, then shrugged it off. Some customers were just weird. He turned back to his phone. Minutes passed. The store was small, but the man didn't come to the counter. He didn't even seem to be browsing. James glanced at the security cameras. The man was standing in the same spot near the back of the store, completely still. His face was turned toward the shelves, but his hands never moved. A chill ran down James's spine. Something about this wasn't right. He cleared his throat and called out, "Sir, do you need any help?" No answer. The man didn't even flinch. James sighed, stepping out from behind the counter. Maybe the guy was on something, or maybe he had fallen asleep standing up. But as James got closer, he felt something strange in the air. A heaviness, like the pressure before a storm. The fluorescent lights flickered, just for a second. He stopped walking. The man turned his head. It was a slow, unnatural movement, as if his neck had rusted over time. And when James saw his face, his breath caught in his throat. The man's eyes were empty, not figuratively, literally. The sockets were hollow, gaping holes of darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. His mouth twitched at the corners, forming something that might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. James stumbled back, "Sir, I think you need to." The lights went out. Total blackness. James's heart pounded in his chest. He fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the shelves, the fridges, the counter. But the man was gone. The store was silent. James swallowed hard. Maybe the guy had run out when the lights went off. He hurried back to the counter, reaching for the phone to check the security footage. The cameras still had power. He rewound the footage, watching himself walk toward the man. Then the lights flickered, the screen went black, and when it came back, the man was gone. Just gone. James exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. It had to be a glitch. He had to be imagining things. The glass door chimed. James froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the entrance. The door was shut. No one was there. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to breathe, to move, to check the parking lot through the window. Empty. Just the gas pumps, the neon glow of the sign, and the endless stretch of dark highway beyond. Then he heard it. A soft shuffle of feet against the tiled floor. Inside the store, James spun around, his flashlight scanning the aisles. Nothing. No one. The store was empty, but he wasn't alone. The air felt heavy again, pressing against him, suffocating. The refrigerators hummed, but underneath it, there was something else. A whisper, faint, barely audible. He couldn't make out the words, but they were there, seeping into his bones, filling his head with static. James backed toward the counter. He needed to leave. He didn't care if he lost his job, if his boss thought he was crazy. He needed to get out. Then he saw it. On the security screen, just behind him, a figure standing at the end of the aisle. James whipped around, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Empty. Nothing there. He turned back to the screen. The figure was closer. James felt his stomach drop. His breathing turned shallow. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, surrounding him. The figure on the screen took another step forward. Then another. Then the screen went black. James ran. He didn't stop until he was outside, under the cold night air, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The store was still, the windows dark. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking. As he turned to unlock the door, he caught his reflection in the car window. And behind him, in the glass, a hollow-eyed face staring back. The next morning, James quit. He never went back. The manager called, asking why he had abandoned the store. He tried to explain, but what could he say? That he had seen something that shouldn't exist? That something had followed him home? Because it had. Even now, late at night, when the world is quiet and still, he hears it. A soft chime, the sound of a door opening, and a whisper. Was it a trick of the mind? Or something truly supernatural lurking in the store? The building was supposed to be empty. That was the first rule of the night shift. Once the office workers left at 7 p.m., no one else was allowed inside until morning. It was just a routine security job. Walk the halls every few hours, check the cameras, write up any incidents, and try to stay awake until sunrise. But something about this place always felt wrong. Daniel had worked security for a few years, and he had seen his fair share of weird things. Lights turning on by themselves, doors unlocked when they shouldn't be, shadows moving just out of sight. But nothing ever made him feel watched. This place was different. The air was thick with something he couldn't explain. Something that made his skin prickle and his instincts scream at him to leave. It was 2:46 a.m. when he first saw it. He was sitting in the small security office, sipping stale coffee and half listening to the static-filled hum of the radio, when movement flickered on one of the monitors. Floor 7. A figure just at the edge of the camera's frame. Daniel leaned forward. No one was supposed to be there. He adjusted the screen, switching to the next camera angle. The hallway was long and empty, lined with glass office doors, each one locked. The figure was gone. His pulse quickened. He switched to another angle, scanning each feed carefully. There, just a glimpse of something turning the corner at the end of the hall. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and radio. His job was simple: check the area, make sure no one had broken in. Maybe it was a janitor who had forgotten to sign out, or some executive working late. Still, he couldn't shake the unease crawling up his spine. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, the sound unnaturally loud in the empty building. The hallway stretched before him, silent and still. He walked carefully, his boots echoing against the marble floor. Each office door was locked, the rooms dark inside. Nothing seemed out of place. Then he heard it, a soft shuffle of feet on carpet. Not his. Daniel turned sharply, his flashlight sweeping the hallway. No one was there. His radio crackled, just static at first. Then something else. A whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but they were there, faint and distant, like someone speaking from the end of a long tunnel. A chill crept over him. "This is Daniel requesting a radio check," he said, his voice steady. The static buzzed louder. Then the whispering stopped. A soft click echoed down the hall. A door unlocking. Daniel's grip on the flashlight tightened. He took slow, careful steps toward the sound. The last office on the left had its door slightly ajar. He knew, without a doubt, that it had been locked earlier. Pushing the door open, he swept his flashlight inside. The office was empty. Desk, chair, bookshelves, everything untouched. No signs of forced entry, but the chair was turned toward the window, facing out, and it was spinning. Not fast, just slowly, as if someone had been sitting there moments ago and had just stood up. The air in the room was thick, heavy. He felt it pressing against him, the unmistakable weight of being watched. Daniel reached for his radio again, his fingers tense. Possible trespasser on floor 7. Checking now. No response. He stepped back into the hallway, glancing toward the camera mounted in the corner. It should have caught everything. He needed to check the footage. The walk back to the security office felt longer than before. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed in his ears. The hallways felt darker, the reflections in the glass walls distorted, stretched. When he reached the monitors, his stomach dropped. The feed for floor 7 was black. Every other camera worked fine, but the footage from the last 10 minutes was just gone, as if the system had skipped over it completely. Then the screen flickered. The camera came back on, and there he was, Daniel, standing in the hallway. He watched himself enter the office, his flashlight beam sweeping the room. He watched himself back out into the hallway. But then, something moved behind him. A figure, just barely visible, standing in the dark corner of the office, just beyond where his flashlight had reached. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long, unnatural, and its head was tilted at an impossible angle, as if its neck had been snapped. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had been in that room. He had felt nothing, seen nothing, but something had been there, watching. The camera feed cut to static. Daniel didn't move. His hands were ice cold, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He replayed the footage again. Each time, the figure was there, standing, waiting, but it was only on the camera, not in real life, not where he had been. His radio crackled again. A whisper. This time, he could hear the words. "I see you." The screen flickered once more, and on the feed, right there behind him in the security office, the figure stood, right behind him. Daniel didn't turn around. He ran. He never came back. The next morning, the day shift security team found the office empty, the monitors still running. Nothing was missing, nothing broken. The footage from the night before was corrupted, completely erased. But one thing was different. The chair in the last office on floor 7, still spinning. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. Only the hum of the refrigerator, the distant buzz of a street lamp outside, and the occasional rustling of napkins in the weak breeze of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Emma had worked the night shift at this little roadside diner for 6 months, and by now, she was used to the quiet. Most of the customers who came in this late were truckers, drunks, or lonely souls looking for a place to sit and sip coffee until morning. But there were some nights like this one, when the emptiness felt different, less peaceful, more expectant. She glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. Outside, the neon open 24 hours sign flickered, casting a reddish glow onto the pavement. The only car in the lot was her manager's old Ford, which hadn't run in years. No one else was around. Then the bell over the door chimed. Emma turned her head. A man had stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, black hoodie, jeans, heavy boots. His face was pale, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had all the time in the world. "Take a seat anywhere," she said, trying to sound casual. The man didn't respond. He just walked to the farthest booth in the back, his steps making no sound against the linoleum floor. Emma grabbed a menu and made her way over. She could feel the weight of his gaze before she even reached the table. She placed the menu in front of him. "Can I get you something to drink?" His eyes met hers. They were dark, almost black, and so still. No emotion, no warmth. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low, flat. Emma nodded. "Coming right up." As she turned to walk away, something about him sent a shiver down her spine. There was an unnatural stillness to him, like he barely breathed. She grabbed the coffee pot from the warmer, filling a cup with slightly shaky hands. As she walked back to the table, she noticed something. He hadn't touched the menu. Most people at least pretended to look. She set the coffee down in front of him. "Anything else?" The man wrapped his fingers around the cup but didn't drink. He just stared at her. "You work alone?" he asked. The question made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Emma forced a smile. "No, my cook's in the back." It was a lie. Frank, the cook, had called out sick. She was alone tonight. The man didn't react. Emma swallowed. "I'll, give you a minute to decide on your order." She turned quickly and made her way back to the counter. Something about him wasn't right. She grabbed her phone from under the register, pretending to check messages. But really, she was searching for news updates. And then she saw it. Breaking news. Night Stalker strikes again. 5th victim found. Her stomach twisted. The Night Stalker. That's what the news was calling him. A serial killer who had been targeting lone night shift workers in small towns. Every victim had been found in their place of work, gas stations, motels, all-night diners. No forced entry, no struggle. Just gone. Emma's breath came short and quick. She looked up. The man was still staring at her. Her hands trembled as she locked her phone and shoved it back under the counter. Think. Stay calm. She could call the police. But what if she was wrong? What if he was just some guy passing through? What if she wasn't wrong? The bell over the door rang again. Emma's heart nearly stopped. A second man walked in. This one was different, middle-aged, wearing a trucker cap and a flannel jacket. He looked tired but harmless. "Just coffee," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Emma nodded quickly, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. She poured the coffee and slid it toward him. She cast another glance at the man in the booth. He hadn't moved. He was still watching. "You okay?" the trucker asked, eyeing her carefully. Emma hesitated. Should she say something? Would it make things worse? She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a long night." The trucker took a sip of his coffee. "Thought I saw a car parked down the road a ways. Black sedan. No plates. Weird." Emma's stomach turned to ice. Slowly, she turned her eyes back to the man in the booth. He was smiling now. A thin, knowing smile. The trucker followed her gaze, then leaned in slightly. His voice was low when he spoke. "That him?" Emma barely nodded. The trucker's hand shifted under the counter. The air felt thick, like something was about to snap. The man in the booth tilted his head slightly, like he was listening. Then, the lights flickered, and the diner phone rang. The sudden sound made Emma jump. The trucker stiffened. The man in the booth didn't move. Emma's pulse pounded as she reached for the receiver. "Hello." Silence. Then, a voice. "You should have locked the back door." A chill shot through her body. She slammed the phone down, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The trucker stood up fast, reaching into his jacket. "You got a back in trance?" Emma's throat was dry. "Why yeah. Lock it. Now." Emma ran to the back, her hands fumbling as she reached for the deadbolt. It was already unlocked. Her heart stopped. She swore she had locked it when she came in. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around. Nothing, but the air felt wrong. She slammed the bolt into place and rushed back to the front. The trucker was facing the booth, but the man in black was gone. His coffee cup sat untouched, steam still rising. The door had never chimed. The seat hadn't moved. It was as if he had never been there. The trucker pulled out a knife, his face grim. "We need to go. Now." Emma didn't argue. She grabbed her phone, her keys, her coat. The trucker walked her to the door, scanning the parking lot. The night was too quiet. His voice was low. "You got somewhere safe to go?" Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure. She stepped outside, her hands shaking. The trucker glanced around once more before walking toward his truck. "Don't stay here tonight." Emma turned toward her car, gripping her keys so tight they dug into her palm. Then she saw it. Across the street, a black sedan. No plates. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger door was slightly ajar. The night air suddenly felt colder. Emma got into her car and locked the doors. She turned the ignition. In the rearview mirror, under the pale streetlight, a dark figure stood, watching. She didn't wait. She hit the gas and drove. She didn't stop until she saw morning light. The hospital at night was nothing like it was during the day. The halls were too quiet, the air too still, the sterile white walls almost gray under the dim emergency lighting. Adam had worked the night shift for nearly a year, and he had learned to ignore the strange little things. The shadows that seemed to move just out of sight, the call buttons lighting up in empty rooms, the faint sounds of footsteps when no one else was around. He told himself it was just his imagination, just the exhaustion of working long hours alone in a place filled with so much pain, sickness, and death. But there was one night he couldn't explain. It started at 3:12 a.m. Adam was at the nurse's station, flipping through patient charts, when the monitors flickered. Power surge, maybe. He barely noticed at first. But then, from down the hall, the sound of a door creaking open made him pause. He looked up. The hallway was empty. Room 209. His stomach tightened. 209 had been empty for weeks. No patients, no staff assigned to it. Maintenance had been scheduled to check the faulty air conditioning, but no one ever got around to it. There was no reason for that door to be open. Adam stood up slowly, his heartbeat picking up. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe the air pressure had shifted. Maybe the door had never been fully latched. He just had to go close it. That was all. The closer he got to the room, the colder the air became. A deep, unnatural cold that seeped into his skin, his bones. His breath came out in a thin mist, like it was the middle of winter. The door was open just an inch. From inside, the dim glow of the nightlight flickered against the wall. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. Then he heard it. A whisper, soft, raspy, coming from inside the room. His pulse pounded in his ears. He stepped back. A slow creak echoed as the door opened wider, just enough for him to see the bed inside. And someone was sitting in it. A figure, thin and frail, their back hunched, their head tilted slightly as if listening. His breath caught in his throat. The hospital was empty. The room was empty. He knew that. Yet someone was there. The figure turned its head slowly, too slowly, like it hadn't moved in years. And then Adam saw its face. Or rather, he didn't. There was nothing. Just darkness. A void where a face should have been shifting, moving, stretching like something was trying to form but couldn't. The whispering grew louder. Adam took a step back. Then another. The figure stood up. The whispering stopped. Silence. Then, in a voice that did not belong in this world, it spoke. "You don't belong here." The air collapsed around him. A pressure so heavy it felt like drowning. Adam turned and ran. His feet barely felt the ground as he sprinted back toward the nurse's station. His breath ragged, his vision swimming. Behind him, footsteps. Fast. Too fast. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He reached the station and slammed his hand against the emergency alarm. The shrill sound cut through the silence, but the moment it rang out, everything stopped. The footsteps, The cold, the pressure, the monitors flickered again. And then, nothing. Silence. The hallway was empty. Room 209's door was shut. The air was warm again. The alarm continued to blare, and within minutes, another nurse rushed in from the east wing. What happened? Are you okay? Adam's mouth was dry. His whole body was shaking. He looked back down the hall. 209's door was locked, as if it had never been open. He never told anyone what he saw. How could he? No one would believe him. The next morning, he checked the security footage. The cameras had gone black at 3:12 a.m. The only thing the footage showed before the blackout? Him, standing in the hallway, staring at nothing. But there was something else. The timestamp, it never resumed, like time had simply stopped. Adam quit 2 weeks later. No one lasted long on the night shift after that. And room 209? They sealed it off permanently. Because sometimes when the hospital is quiet, when the night is still, and when the air is just a little too cold, the door still opens. Thank you for listening to these terrifying stories. If you have ever experienced something strange during a night shift, let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy horror stories like these, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale of terror. Stay safe, and don't stay alone in the dark.